over to you. Okay, over to you, Mark. And thanks, Pan, for sending out the link. I hope everyone got it and that everyone's actually had a chance to listen or to watch.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks, Coral, and thanks everybody for coming a second time. Coral just asked me to do just a sort of brief recap, just in case you weren't here last time, or just as a reminder of basically what the presentation was about. So the topic is logo theatre. And the name of the I gave to the talk was of the creative bone. And just a brief summary and overview of what I covered in that presentation. Two quotes which are very pertinent to the field of my research, which is one of Dr. Frankl's quotes: all psychotherapy is ultimately something of an art. And one of Dr. Chantal's quotes: logotherapy illuminates the art of living. So logotheater refers to the synergies between the philosophies, principles, and techniques of logotherapy and acting stroke theater, and the potential for each to enhance the other's processes and outcomes. Logotherapeutic processes can potentially make better actors and directors. Acting processes have the potential to empower logotherapists to deepen their clients' journeys towards discovering meaning and purpose through ever-evolving creative and stimulating methods, as well as the development of the therapist's own vocal, emotional, observational, improvisational, and interpretive skills. The first course consists of 8 modules covering topics ranging from breathing as meaning to principles of storytelling for reframing choices, and incorporates training in the techniques of logotheater for the therapist and how to pass them on to the client in the therapeutic process. Practical implementation of skills essential to the training, which may be attended online or in person. After I'd submitted this to Sean, he actually suggested that I separate, and because he felt that the storytelling was such a complex thing that actually become a separate course on its own. So I've actually developed a second course as a sort of a complementary course to this first one, which is around storytelling, the goals of which is to impart a deep knowledge and understanding of the principles and techniques of storytelling, which enable the therapist to guide the client in reframing their circumstances as a unique story. The ultimate goal is to open the client's imagination to the possibilities inherent in each situation and the realization that they have the power to change the direction of their stories through choices. Storytelling lies at the heart of logotheater, offering as it does a lens through which to examine the uniqueness of our lives via our personal hero's journey, on which we evolve in response to our circumstances. At the core of the process lies the truth that stories cannot exist without challenges and adversity, and that unavoidable suffering can be a catalyst for triumph. Before I open for questions, I think what it needs to be very clear is that, and I've picked this up as I think a bit of confusion from comments I've heard there and there, that this is not about turning therapists into actors or making clients do acting and getting into role playing and all of that kind of stuff as like they use in psychodrama. What this is about is taking the techniques, the processes, the exercises, the specific way of working, which I developed over many, many years of working with actors, and unlocking the specific type of imaginative and creative powers, if you like, which are necessary in the creative process. And how those very same imaginative and creative processes can be utilized by the therapist to become a better therapist themselves, and also to assist the client on their journey, particularly towards meaning and purpose. So and the research group that I'm working with at the moment, they all arrived in fear and trepidation in the first session and said, "Oh, we're all going to have to act now." And I said, "No, that's not about it at all." So they feel a little more confident now. Okay, so yeah, so I'd like anything anybody would like to ask or comment on or ask for clarity on. So what are your skeletons, Coral?
Plenty. There are thousands of them. If I might start with the one comment you made last time, which really held my interest. And you said the ultimate purpose of an actor was to hold the mirror up to nature, to be the reflection and the champion of the truth. I wondered if you could just say a bit more about that, because that reflection and to nature and the ultimate truth piqued my interest, and I wanted just to know a bit more about that.
That's really, I think, how we define the role of the artist, not only in the performing arts, but in all the arts, the visual arts, the performing arts, the creative arts, because that really is the function of art, is to comment on our lives as human beings, the human condition, and to provide stories which either, as Shakespeare says, hold a mirror up, enable us to recognize ourselves and our circumstances in the lives of others, always remembering that our own circumstances are unique to us. And yeah, so in the purpose of any great art is to reflect the human condition with all its highs and lows, triumphs, and I think, and I believe, to challenge us to rise above adversity and to challenge particularly that which is wrong. I think great art um, has a way of reminding us of our responsibility as human beings to other human beings fundamentally.
So, if the participants of your workshop are not acting themselves, are you providing acting examples that help them to reflect in that way?
So, for example, there are various exercises that I've been developing with them. One of them was a story reframing exercise where, so a lot of the work starts, the starting point of the work is visualization. Okay, visualization is a very important tool for an actor when it comes to things like emotional recall. If one is looking at a sort of method acting process and an actor is trying to recall a specific emotion which is real to themselves, part of the process of that recall is being able to visualize the situation 100% and engage all the senses. So to remember what they were wearing, who they were with, what environment they were in, were there any noises around, what was the weather like. So in other words, to recreate an experience fully. Additionally, visualization, for example, in the delivery of poetry or descriptive narrative passages and things like that, it's very, very important for the actor to, as it were, run the movie of that description, of that narrative in their minds, when they see it themselves, they enable us, the audience, to see it. So the development of the visualization skills, vital to an actor, and also I believe in the process of therapeutic healing, because imagination is very important in order to identify possibilities for change and shifting, and to bring about things like attitude modulations. And visualization is incredibly powerful tool in that. So I started the first few weeks of the course just working with things like visualization, breathing, which is also very important. Obviously, breathing is very important for speech, but it has multiple other purposes, as we know. Um, and then I started off quite early with a story reframing exercise where I asked each of them to recall an incident which had a profound effect, a profound negative effect on their lives, and it had to be something that had happened in the past. And we were working, I was introducing them to the notion of fate and freedom, and there were those things over which we have no control, but that we have the freedom to choose how to deal with them, as we know. But what I realized is that some people and some clients sometimes make the mistake of thinking that something exists in the area of fate, where actually in the present, there still does exist some freedom to reframe what happened in the past. So, for example, one of the people that I'm working with is she's a lady of 72, very successful career in the dance field. She was a ballet dancer, and then she was the artistic director of the South African Dance Umbrella, a very big international dance festival. And she was forced, she ran that for about 30 years, and she was forced to give it up, like so many of the things with the arts in this country, several years ago, because of lack of funding and lack of support. It's an extremely painful thing for her to let that festival go and say goodbye to it. And she went back, she took herself back in the process that we went through, which I won't get into now, it's quite long and involved, but she took herself back to the night that she was standing on stage and announcing that the festival would no longer be continuing. And all she could feel in that moment of standing there was an overwhelming sense of loss, of futility, of failure, all of those things. And nothing that anybody said to her that night kind of could change the way she felt. And she's been carrying that bitterness and anger and sense of hurt and betrayal forward for the last 3 years. And what happened to her that night is that somehow she locked into the moment on the stage where she was standing there, where she heard the applause of the audience applauding for her, which I don't think she was capable of hearing in the moment in the actual time that it occurred, because she was just feeling so angry. And when we came out of the exercise and it got to be her turn to talk, she was very, very emotional. And she said, by taking myself back into that moment and revisualizing the experience and really I heard myself really listening to the applause that I was getting from the people when after I announced. And instead of feeling that overwhelming sense of anger and sadness for what was past, I suddenly realized I heard something different in the applause, what people were giving me. And she said that then started her mind thinking, and she started then to think of the things that people had said to her on that night after the thing was over, and the odd letters and messages and things that she got. Not a lot, but she suddenly was able to start looking at it without as much bitterness and anger, and start to see that she's naturally quite a negative person. She's one of those people who will say, well, I wasted 30 years of my life on this thing, instead of looking at what she's achieved. And since doing that exercise, she's shifted the way she looks at that whole experience, and most particularly how it ended, and reframed her attitude towards it, and is moving forward now in a much more positive way, to the extent that she's now even saying she'd cut herself off from the dance world completely. And she's now going back to, even though she's 72, attending a ballet class once a week and spending time in dance studios. She just felt the dance world was too painful for her to approach again. And something in the working with the visualization process and re-encountering that situation almost for real in the process opened up things that she hadn't really taken cognizance of at the time because of the emotional state she was in then. With hindsight and distance, something, and in the process of the exercise, unlocked the memory in a different way. And she's now moving forward with it very differently to how she's been for the last 3 years. So that's an example. Then, for example, another example would be I have an exercise which I call end of life movies, where I'll ask the client to imagine that they're lying on their deathbed, and that somebody has come to them and said, I'm going to make a short film of your life. And in this film, I want to include something that you're very grateful for, one of the things that you're probably most grateful for in your life, either through giving or receiving or both, the achievement that you're the proudest of, and the one choice that you wish you'd made differently. And then again, through a process of visualization, they have to create the scenes in their mind of how these things play out visually. And then to almost just as a distancing thing, to cast an actor, either a known actor or somebody completely that they make up in their minds, in the role of themselves. Okay. They then tell the story of this movie in the third person to a partner. They explain that this person, they give themselves a different name, and they describe the movie and the scenes in this movie to that person. So you've got people working in groups of two. And then when the group gets back together, that person then describes the other person's movie as it has been imparted to them. So that exercise is still in the early stages of development, but very interesting things. So it's obviously there's self-distancing and also hearing someone else uh, tell your story in their own words about you in the third person. There were some very interesting things that started to come out then, and the realization also that. In the discussions afterwards quite often happened was that the choices that they wished they could have changed ultimately further down the line in some instances led to something else that wouldn't have happened if that choice hadn't been made at that moment. So it's there are kind of multiple things coming out of exercises like that. um, Things like working with breathing and the voice and understanding the breath very much as obviously the life force, but then also the source of voice. And I do think that that voice is a very, very important tool for the therapist. And unfortunately, there are so many people who don't talk in their natural voice. You know, we are, and I'm sorry, this sounds like a terrible generalization, but quite often women will talk in a pitch that is much higher than their natural voice is. You know, we find, but not so much now, but in younger generation, when women were, you know, told they had to be feminine things, you very often find when I start working with young actresses saying, why are you talking up there in that squeaky little voice? And you realize it's all an attempt to be feminine. And as you work with them, you start to find the person's real voice, their true voice, in other words. And I think it's very important for the therapists to have an extremely flexible tool in their vocal abilities, which enables them to do things with their voices, respond naturally to the moment as we do as logotherapists, but vocally as well in certain ways. So that's not something I do so much with this group because they're obviously more in the role of clients in this research group. That's something more that I would work with therapists. And then working with things like, so the principles of storytelling, for example, I'd work with, say, the story of Red Riding Hood. And every story has what we call an inciting incident, which is the incident which sets the story off. And then there are what we call in obligatory beats in every single story. Those are the beats without which a story cannot happen. So, for example, you can't tell the story of Red Riding Hood without the beat in which Red Riding Hood meets the wolf. And and then obviously you can add in what we call detail beats, which flesh out the story, but are not necessarily necessary for the story to happen. The point being that, you know, very often people say, well, you know, now I'm going to tell the story, I'm going to tell it differently. So then I'm going to make Red Riding Hood not meet the wolf. Okay, and then, well, then we don't have a story. The point is that stories only exist when the protagonist is faced with some kind of challenge and has to overcome. And then this speaks then to about how life, in a way, is a series of risks. That if we are not prepared to have the beats in our stories which are going to challenge us and which are going to create difficulties for us, we're not actually going to be living. And one of the things that I apply there is the idea of pets and how we know when we get a pet that it's probably going to cause us a great deal of emotional pain one day because it's not going to live as long as we do. And it's probably going to die before us. But do we say, I'm not going to get myself a dog because in 10 years' time I'm going to go through the most terrible pain? No, we go in knowing that it's not actually a risk, it's a definite, unless something happens to us first, that we will be caused pain by that process. But we must in order to live, we must accept that. The same thing with anything going into a relationship. I'm not ever going to have a relationship because it's too easy to get hurt. I'm not going to form friendships. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to put myself out there. And storytelling is very useful, for example, in people like who are not prepared to take risks, who don't live, as Dr. Chantal always describes the headstones that she talks about. You come to the first one, and here was the person who never really lived and never really did anything. So as you can see, none of this has really got anything to do with acting and being an actor, but they're all tools and skills which come from um, the artistic creation, particularly in the telling of stories through the performing arts and through writing.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yes, Irene.
In today's modern society, where technology is constantly playing a role for constant change and stuff, if you do this, when you do this online, how can you differentiate that it's the person's own story and they didn't get it on some sort of technology platform, given the knowledge that children today they've got that hindrance in their creativity, where they cannot really most of the time imagine because they're so stuck to their phones?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very interesting question, because this is exactly what this tries to tackle, is the unlocking of our individual imaginations, because the modern world is allowing us to use our imaginations and our creativity less and less and less. And now with the arrival of AI, we don't even have to think. We just type in a few keywords and it can spew out. So your question is, how does one know if the story is real or whether the person is making it up? Are you asking that in a client therapy situation, or?
You want to help this person to get, say, overwhelmness, or you want to help this person to discover what's the true purpose in their own life, and not for them to follow the crowd like the young people do nowadays, or the women, like you say, but to identify, this is my true personality and character and what I was meant to be, my purpose. Not that everyone has to be exactly the right character in the red in the wolf
Right.
story. You know what I'm
So
saying? When it's online, how can you as a therapist identify that it is that person's core problem or situation?
I find that initially I found it difficult to work online, but the more I do it, I find it easier and easier. Um, Obviously, sitting in the same space as somebody else, it's far easier to tap into the truth. But hopefully, when you're sitting on a camera and you can see the person's eyes, I think, particularly with children, and yes, that is something that happens. You'll ask them to tell you a story, and they tell you something which they've seen somewhere or read somewhere. And a way of getting through that is to then say to them, okay, now take that story and tell it to me differently. Or if they're reading it, tell it to me in your own words. Or if you were actually if we were to change this little piece of this story here, what do you think you would do there? Okay, so you always keep them in the role of the protagonist in the story, but then just keep challenging them about choices. It's always choices, choices, choices. What is this beat in the story? What is the character being challenged to do at this point? And what do you think they should be doing? And what do you think they shouldn't be doing? And gradually through, particularly with young children, as they start to unpack those, they will start to understand for themselves. Not that one is talking in terms of meaning and purpose to them, but they will start to understand what it is that they think they are meant to be doing from moment to moment in their lives. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes. So am I hearing correctly? You're keeping to the therapy principles and the guidelines by delving in deeper and deeper, regardless where they got the story.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, yes. The story can always be a starting point. That's the great thing about a story. It only has to be a starting point. A story can constantly evolve and develop, because you can change it all the time. You have the power in a story to play God, as it were, and make as many changes as you like to tell the story that you want to tell. Um, the difference comes in when it is our own story, and there's sometimes we are not able to change the beat in the story. That is the way it was written. But as I say, very often there's a tendency to believe that the way it was written can't be changed, or that we can't see it in a different way in the present and take it forward into the future.
Sorry, I also think it's easier maybe when you use a unique story that's not your story, and then as a therapist, you're highly skilled then later to link it to, oh, but it is actually their narrative. They just felt safe at first to use another story. So
Yeah,
that's a
so that
very
obviously
good concept.
speaks to the idea of metaphor, and metaphor is a very powerful tool in storytelling as well. I have one person who I work with who can only describe herself in the very first time she came to see me. She spoke about herself as a Kenwood chef, which was she's the same age as I am. And anybody who's my age who grew up in South Africa remembers those big Kenwood chef mixes and the terrible noise that they made. And if you made them faster and slower, and we eventually got to the point where, we were always, when she came in, when we would check in, it was like, how fast is the Kenwood chef on today and which attachment is it using? And eventually the story she wrote, we created a story around a Kenwood chef, which was a metaphor for something that she was going through at the time. And it was a lot of fun, and it was very useful, and it was very creative.
Mark, I would, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
I'm trying not to speak in too high a pitchy voice. Firstly, I just want to commend you. I listened to the talk. Sadly, I couldn't be there last week or 2 weeks ago. The work that you have put into it, the amount of detail, I find it incredibly exciting. And I do think that there's a huge space for therapists to your appeal to therapists to be more creative, and I'm sure that there would be a place in university for people studying psychotherapy to actually bring out that part of them that is creative, because each client is someone unique. And the excitement is how do I, interact with that person? What can I do to bring that person out, or myself out for that matter? Yeah. So I think, and also what I found incredible is actually we all act. So in fact, it's not that divorced from living our lives, really, because we all are on the stage, we all wear masks, we all act at certain times. I think it's very appropriate to separate out your storytelling. I would love to do something like that. Storytelling, I think, is so powerful. So I think it's incredibly exciting what you're doing, and I just want to congratulate you. I mean, the work you've put into this is huge, and the depth.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I think that we, that's why I called my presentation "The Creative Bone," off that expression that people say, "Oh, I don't have a creative bone in my body," which is rubbish. Every single one of us, every being on this planet, has imagination and has the ability to be creative. And it's about just finding that and unlocking it. And for me, therapy is an extremely creative process, and particularly so logotherapy, which is when there is so much emphasis on treating each client as a very, very unique individual. The process itself being improvisational, having to stay from moment to moment. So obviously improvisation is a very important tool in theatre and acting and actor training as well. And one of the core principles of the course as well is working with improvisational tools for therapists. So what is improvisation? How does one work improvisationally? There's certain exercises I do around things, what I would call accepting a stimulus and things like that, which enable you just to quite easily unlock the channel to that creativity and that imagination, which is there, and which so many people are, in a way, kind of frightened of, and we know why that is. For those of us, again, of a certain age, we were not encouraged to think imaginatively or creatively or uniquely or individually, and to find, and that stuff gets buried, but it's there and it's waiting to be released and unlocked.
Sorry.
And there's nothing more powerful than coming out of a session and just feeling that you have been that you have worked with that client so creatively that you've been able to, you know, and things sometimes just come, you think, where the hell did that come from? But it's just being so in the moment and tapping into and really hearing what that client is saying, which is another thing which comes from the theater. You know, we talk about text and subtext. So the text is the lines that the actors speak, but very often what is being said is what is not. We very often, you know, we'll say to the actors, speak the subtext. I'm not hearing your subtext. And that, I think, is at the core of logotherapeutic listening as well. We're listening to the words that the therapists say, but there's so much more. How are they saying? What are they not saying? What, you know, there's layers of listening that need to be involved.
Sorry, Mark, I hate to do this, but Diana's got her
Sorry, yes,
hand up, and
yes, sorry,
got her hand
Diana.
up, and we've got 5 minutes left. 4
Yes,
minutes
okay,
left.
Diana,
4 minutes.
yes. Sorry, I know I must learn to be more succinct.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
I can defer to someone else if we only have 5 minutes left. I don't even know if I can say what I want to say in 5 minutes. So maybe
Go.
I've always loved stories and storytelling. The idea that I am a story that is being told gives me a feeling of comfort, almost. And I had a friend who was telling me about, you know, her sad story, like the story that doesn't go the way you want it to go. So her and her boyfriend were they had put money down, they were gonna buy this house, it did not go that way. It went sideways a whole bunch of different ways. He ended up cheating on her. She ended up staying in her tiny apartment, having to come to terms with being in a tiny apartment. And then she ended up redecorating and changing her view on this tiny apartment. And I just could not help but feel that the story was way more interesting the way that it was playing out rather than and then we lived happily ever after. Me and the guy, we got together, we bought a house, and then that's where the story ends. And then I tried to attribute it to myself, and I went, well, like, you love stories, Diana. So right now I'm a character in my story. The character or the protagonist, the main character, feels lost and confused and washed ashore on a beach, and is caring for their dying mother, but is feeling as if God is not talking to them. Well, do I enjoy it? No, I don't enjoy it. But from the place of storytelling, it's one thing that makes me feel good. I go, well, this is a character I'm interested in now. If I was reading this story, I would want to know, yeah, what's going on with this character? Like, what's going to happen now? They're lost, so something's got to happen eventually, right? You know, like how with Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, you can be lost, but how long can you be lost until you find something or something finds you, you know? And I just wanted to mention that I remember hearing a poet talking about the soul is not actually interested in winning or losing at life. The soul is interested in just having its own experience. And so to be lost in this story that I'm in, is my soul having its own experience? And I don't know. I just want to share that. I don't.
Yeah, yes, that's wonderful.
Mark,
That thing about
sorry.
it's not, is the soul wanting to be good? They're
I-
having
I
an
hate-
experience. Life is an experience. Sorry, we ran out of time.
I really hate this job, but I have to interrupt and say we've got 1 minute. So maybe we carry on next month. We can have a chat, Mark, and see if we can set up another time.
Yes, I'm more than happy to do
Okay. In the
many.
meantime, from all of us, thank you very, very much for that and for the amazing work that you're doing. It's really fascinating stuff. Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
If anybody wants to ask me anything, I mean, if you can send me an email or
Okay.
whatever.
Maybe that's a good idea.
Also
Pan, if
Yeah.
you're willing to,
that.
spread your email address, Pan can send it out to everyone.
And
Yes.
I'd welcome comments because I'm still so much in the process of developing this and doing
Okay.
research and stuff. So, I'd love
Okay.
to have more questions. And things.
Terrific. Fantastic. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. And
Thank you.
thanks for the contribution.
Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mark.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark.